Princess Anne demands answers. After guard reports what Camilla did to Charlotte. Birds chirped softly from the trees, and the air was filled with the faint scent of blooming flowers. For most of the staff and the royal family, it was a peaceful start to the day. But for young Prince Louis, the morning felt anything but ordinary. Louis, a boy of 7, had always been full of energy and curiosity. While he adored his family and loved the palace, there were moments when the endless rules and routines felt suffocating. Each day seemed to blend into the next, with formal lessons, scheduled playtime, and constant supervision by a team of caretakers and royal aides. To him, it sometimes felt as if his world had shrunk into walls, corridors, and guarded spaces. He longed for freedom, even if only for a few minutes, to do something unexpected and unplanned. On this particular morning, Louis woke up earlier than usual. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring out the tall window at the morning light streaming across the gardens. In that quiet moment, he felt a mix of excitement and mischief. His mind wandered to the royal train, a grand vehicle that rested on the private tracks near the estate. He had watched it many times from a distance, fascinated by its polished carriages, shiny rails, and the stories told about the journeys it had taken. It had always seemed magical, a moving palace in its own right, carrying people on adventures far from the confines of his own home. Louis's curiosity quickly turned into a plan. If he could sneak away just for a short while, he could explore the train and experience something truly exciting. He imagined himself riding through the countryside, watching trees, rivers, and hills pass by from a train window, all without anyone telling him where he could or could not go. The thought made his heart race. It was a dangerous idea, of course, but danger always had a strange allure for him. The rules were everywhere in his life, and breaking one, even a small one, felt like a tiny victory. He quietly dressed in simple clothes, careful not to wake anyone. His small hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from excitement. He knew that if he were caught, he would be scolded, maybe even sent back to his room with no playtime. But the thrill of the unknown was too strong to resist. He tiptoed through the quiet corridors of the palace, his soft footsteps almost invisible against the polished floors. Each turn he took brought him closer to the private tracks where the royal train awaited, gleaming under the early morning sun. The palace grounds were unusually still. Most of the staff were busy preparing breakfast or attending to their morning duties, unaware that a small, determined boy was quietly making his way out. Louis's heart beat faster with every step, and a small smile formed on his face. He felt like a secret agent, moving with precision, careful not to attract attention. The world outside the palace walls seemed vast and inviting, a sharp contrast to the carefully controlled environment he had grown up in. As he reached the area where the train was stationed, Louis paused for a moment. The train was larger and more magnificent up close than he had imagined. Its shiny exterior reflected the morning sun, and its polished wheels gleamed like silver in the light. The smell of oil, metal, and the faint scent of coal lingered in the air, filling him with a strange sense of adventure. For a moment he simply stood there, mesmerized by the train's size and power. Taking a deep breath, he climbed carefully into one of the carriages, finding a small compartment that was empty and quiet. He closed the door gently behind him, trying to make no sound at all. Inside, the compartment felt like a tiny world of its own, with soft seats, polished wood, and curtains that fluttered slightly with the morning breeze. Louis sank into one of the seats, his heart still racing. He felt a mix of triumph and nervousness. He had done it. He had escaped, even if only for a short while. But as the initial excitement began to fade, reality started to sink in. The train was not moving yet, but it would soon. The world outside the compartment, which had seemed so inviting a moment ago, now felt overwhelming. Louis hugged his small stuffed toy tightly, a comfort he always carried with him. He realized that he was truly alone, without anyone to guide him or reassure him. The thrill of adventure was quickly giving way to a creeping sense of fear. He pressed his small hands to his face, trying to hold back tears, but a few escaped and ran down his cheeks. His sobs were quiet at first, almost lost in the soft sounds of the train and the distant calls of the birds outside. He didn't want anyone to know he was scared. Being brave had always been important to him, and he hated the feeling of being weak or helpless. But the loneliness of the moment was too much to bear in silence. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the absence of the young prince did not go unnoticed for long. A housemaid, preparing breakfast in the main hall, glanced toward his room and noticed the bed was empty. Her first thought was that he had simply wandered into another part of the palace, but when she could not find him after a few minutes, concern began to grow. She quickly alerted the senior staff, and a quiet sense of alarm spread through the halls. The royal aides and caretakers moved swiftly, their trained eyes scanning the estate for any sign of the boy. Each corridor, garden, and side entrance was checked meticulously. Yet despite their efforts, Louis was nowhere to be found. The realization began to sink in. He had left the palace entirely. The thought was frightening, and the urgency of the situation escalated quickly. They knew the only place he could have gone was the royal train. At the train station, the staff were just beginning to prepare for departure. The carriages were polished, the tracks inspected, and the schedule carefully reviewed. No one expected a small, adventurous prince to have quietly boarded. It was only when a guard noticed the door of one compartment slightly ajar that suspicion began to grow. Inside, they could faintly hear the quiet sobs of a child, though they could not yet see who it was. Louis, meanwhile, tried to calm himself. He peeked out the small window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the familiar palace walls. The view was both comforting and disorienting. The estate looked smaller from this distance, and the gardens seemed endless. He realized that he was truly on his own, in a world that suddenly felt much larger and more intimidating than he had imagined. The adventure he had dreamed of now came with the sharp edge of reality. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as he sat in the quiet compartment. Every sound, the distant whistle of the train, the faint footsteps of staff outside, the rustle of the curtains, felt amplified. His heart pounded in his chest as he considered the consequences of his actions. He was a prince, yes, but he was also just a small boy who had made a risky choice. Fear and regret began to mix with the excitement he had felt only moments before. The morning air outside grew warmer, and sunlight spilled more fully into the compartment, highlighting the polished wood and soft seats. Louis's tears slowly dried as he hugged his stuffed toy closer, trying to muster courage. He realized that running away, while thrilling, could not last forever. Someone would find him eventually, and perhaps it was better to face the situation sooner rather than later. But for now, he stayed hidden, caught between fear and the lingering desire for freedom. Little did he know, the royal guard was already mobilizing, moving with precision and determination to ensure his safety. The quiet adventure he had embarked on was about to come to an end, but the story of this morning, his courage, curiosity, and the lessons he would soon learn, would be remembered by everyone involved. Back at the palace, the realization that Prince Louis was missing quickly spread. Like a wave. At first, the staff thought he might have wandered to the gardens or one of the playrooms. After all, he had a curious nature and often explored hidden corners of the palace under the watchful eyes of his caretakers. But when repeated calls went unanswered and the boy was nowhere to be found in any of the usual places, a sense of alarm began to take hold. The chief aide, a calm yet decisive man named Sir Henry, immediately took charge. He had served the royal family for decades and was well accustomed to emergencies, but the thought of a young prince wandering outside the safe confines of the palace was enough to tighten the knot in his chest. Without wasting a moment, he ordered the staff to search the estate from top to bottom. Each corridor, each room, and even the secret passages known only to a few were checked. The palace was large, almost a small city, and ensuring that every corner was examined required careful coordination. As the minutes ticked by, the anxiety in the palace grew. Lady Margaret, one of the prince's main caretakers, wrung her hands nervously. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke to the staff. "He couldn't have gone far, could he?" Her question, though quiet, carried a weight that everyone could feel. They all knew that the prince's safety was paramount, and the idea that he might be alone outside the palace walls was terrifying. Meanwhile, the palace security team had already begun coordinating with the royal guard. The royal guard was an elite team, trained to handle emergencies of all kinds, from political threats to natural disasters. But a missing child, especially a royal one, was a situation that required both urgency and sensitivity. Sir Henry and the head of the guard, Captain Thomas, quickly devised a plan. Their first step was to determine all possible locations the prince could have gone, and it didn't take long to consider the most likely scenario: the royal train. The train, a magnificent vehicle that had carried the royal family on countless journeys, was parked on private tracks near the palace. It was usually under strict supervision, but the early morning hours allowed for a rare window of opportunity. Louis, small and determined, had used this chance to sneak aboard. Knowing this, Captain Thomas immediately dispatched a team of guards to intercept the train before it left the station. Time was of the essence, and every second counted. On the tracks, the train staff were busy with their usual preparations for departure. Carriages were inspected, wheels checked, and the engine tested to ensure a smooth ride. No one initially suspected the presence of the young prince. It wasn't until a guard noticed the faint sound of sobbing that they realized something was amiss. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible at first, but distinct enough to warrant attention. The guard signaled to his colleagues, and a hushed sense of urgency spread among them. Inside his compartment, Louis pressed himself against the seat, trying to stay quiet. His heart raced as he listened to footsteps outside. Every creak of the train floor, every muffled voice from the corridor made him flinch. He clutched his small stuffed toy, holding it as tightly as if it were a lifeline. Fear and anticipation battled within him. He had wanted freedom and adventure, but now, confronted with the reality of the situation, the weight of being alone and hidden became clear. Meanwhile, the royal guard moved with precision along the train. The officers checked each carriage methodically, calling out in calm, reassuring voices. "Is anyone inside? Please respond." Their tone was firm yet gentle, designed to alert any passenger without causing panic. The staff on board assisted them, opening doors and guiding the guards from carriage to carriage. The atmosphere on the train was tense. Everyone understood the stakes. Back at the palace, the news of the prince's disappearance had reached the king and queen. They had been informed of the situation as soon as it became clear that Louis was missing. Though composed outwardly, both felt a surge of worry and concern. The king, normally reserved, paced back and forth in his private chambers, while the queen sat near a window, her hands clasped tightly. Both parents relied on the expertise of the royal guard, but could not help the natural anxiety that came with knowing their young child was out of sight and vulnerable. As the search on the train continued, Louis's sobbing grew quieter. He realized that hiding indefinitely was not a solution. He peeked through the small window of the compartment, hoping to see someone he recognized. The view of the platform was slightly obscured by the morning mist, but he could just make out the figures of men moving purposefully along the tracks. Their uniforms glinted in the sunlight, and their coordinated movements suggested a level of authority he immediately recognized. Inside the palace, Lady Margaret coordinated with the royal guard via a small communication device. She provided detailed information about Louis's habits, favorite compartments on the train, and the likelihood of him hiding in a small, enclosed space. Every detail mattered. The guards listened carefully, noting his tendency to hide under seats, behind curtains, or in small corners that might be overlooked. This knowledge would prove invaluable in the next steps of the search. As the train prepared to leave the station, the chief guard, Captain Thomas, decided to board the train at the earliest possible point. He and a team of officers moved quickly but quietly, careful not to startle any passengers or alarm the staff. Their mission was simple yet critical: locate the young prince and ensure his safety. The sense of duty was palpable. Every member of the team understood the importance of the task at hand. Inside his compartment, Louis could feel the tension even through the closed door. He pressed his hands over his ears as footsteps drew closer, unsure whether the approaching figures were friend or foe. His imagination ran wild, conjuring stories of mysterious strangers, secret rescues, and daring escapes. But at the same time, a small voice inside reminded him that these were the same men who protected his family, the same men he had always trusted. The chief guard knocked gently on the compartment door. "Hello there," he said softly. "We just want to make sure you're safe." "Can you open the door for us?" Louis froze. The voice was calm and kind, but it was also authoritative. It carried a weight that he recognized from the many times he had heard it in the palace. Fear and relief collided in his heart. Could he trust them? The desire to stay hidden warred with the instinct to be safe. Captain Thomas waited patiently, giving Louis time to respond. He knew that rushing or forcing the boy could make him more frightened. Instead, he continued to speak gently, describing who he was and why he was there. "Prince Louis," he said, "we are here to make sure nothing happens to you. You're safe with us. Can you open the door?" Each word was chosen carefully, meant to reassure and calm. Inside the compartment, Louis took a deep breath. The sobbing had stopped, replaced by a nervous quiet. He clutched his toy tightly, feeling a mixture of fear and trust. Slowly, he moved toward the door, hesitating for just a moment before turning the handle. The door creaked open slightly, revealing his small face, tear-streaked but determined. Captain Thomas smiled gently. "That's it, Louis, you're safe now," he said, offering his hand. The other guards approached calmly, surrounding the boy with a protective circle. For the first time in what felt like hours, Louis felt a sense of relief wash over him. The fear that had gripped him in the quiet compartment began to fade, replaced by a warm understanding that he was no longer alone. Outside the compartment, the staff and guards exchanged glances, relieved that their careful plan had worked. They had successfully located the young prince without causing him panic or distress. The situation, though tense and frightening for all involved, was under control. Louis's courage and curiosity had led him into a risky adventure, but the careful coordination of the palace staff and royal guard ensured that the outcome remained positive. As the train prepared to continue its journey, Louis was escorted to a safer area, where he could rest and recover from the emotional whirlwind of the morning. He was surrounded by familiar faces, voices that reassured him, and the comforting presence of those who cared deeply for his safety. Though the adventure had been thrilling, he understood the lessons it carried: the importance of trust, the need to follow guidance, and the value of being found when lost. The train carriages felt unusually quiet as Captain Thomas and his team moved carefully through each one, their boots making soft echoes against the polished floors. Every compartment was checked thoroughly, but the boy was not immediately found. The guards were trained for every kind of emergency, but even they felt a pang of urgency. Prince Louis was a small child, and every passing minute mattered. The atmosphere was tense, yet the team remained composed, knowing that panic would only make the boy more frightened if he heard them. Louis, meanwhile, had curled himself into the corner of his small compartment, hugging his stuffed toy tightly. His tiny fingers clutched the soft fabric as though it were a shield against the vast unknown. Though the initial thrill of sneaking aboard had brought excitement, it had quickly turned into an overwhelming mix of fear, anxiety, and loneliness. Every creak of the carriage, every distant voice, and every shadow made him flinch. He pressed his small face into his hands, trying to calm himself, but the tears kept coming. The young prince had imagined adventure in grand, sweeping ways, gliding past scenic hills, watching rivers shimmer in the sunlight, and feeling the wind rush past the windows. But now, alone and hidden, reality had a sharper edge. The adventure he had dreamed of had transformed into a tense waiting game, with unknown figures searching for him just outside. His heart raced with each knock on the door and every muffled voice. He wished he could disappear further, vanish completely, yet a small, quiet part of him longed to be found and comforted. Captain Thomas, standing just outside the compartment, could hear the faint sobbing. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but distinct enough to guide his next steps. He motioned to two other guards to approach carefully, and together they positioned themselves near the door. They knew the prince was scared and possibly hiding further inside the compartment, so they spoke gently, their voices calm and reassuring. "Prince Louis," Captain Thomas said softly, "we're here to make sure you're safe. You don't have to be afraid. Can you show us that you're okay?" There was a long pause, and inside Louis froze. He recognized the voice from the many times he had heard the captain in the palace, giving orders with authority but also care. The sound brought a strange mix of comfort and hesitation. He wanted to trust the voice, but fear had a strong hold. Slowly, he pressed himself closer to the corner of the compartment, listening intently. The other guards spoke quietly, adding gentle reassurances. "We just want to help you, Louis. You're safe now. Come out when you're ready." Their tone was patient, never rushing, understanding that forcing him out could frighten him further. Captain Thomas knew that showing patience was essential. The prince had chosen to hide, and now the moment of trust had to come from within the child. Inside the compartment, Louis wiped his tears with the back of his hand. His small face was streaked with red from crying, and his eyes were wide with uncertainty. The soft light from the morning sun streaming through the curtains highlighted his vulnerability, yet also made him seem almost brave in his quiet defiance. He clutched his toy even tighter, as if it contained all the courage he could muster. Outside, the guards continued to speak gently. Captain Thomas lowered his voice as though speaking to someone he deeply cared about. "It's all right, Louis. Nothing bad will happen to you. We're here and we will take care of you. You can trust us." Hearing these words, Louis felt a small, flickering sense of relief. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he shifted toward the door. He peeked out slightly, just enough to see the kind faces of the guards. Their calm expressions reassured him that they genuinely wanted to help, not to scold or punish. Taking another deep breath, he slowly opened the door wider, revealing his small, tear-streaked face. Captain Thomas stepped forward gently, extending his hand. "See. You're safe now, Louis. Come out and join us." The other guards gave him space, standing slightly back to avoid overwhelming the boy. Their presence was protective yet respectful, signaling that Louis could trust them without feeling trapped. For a few heartbeats, Louis hesitated. He had imagined this moment countless times in his mind, being found, being scolded, or even being carried back in embarrassment. But now, standing on the edge of his hiding spot, he realized that the guards, patience, and gentle words made him feel unexpectedly safe. Slowly, he placed his hand in Captain Thomas's, allowing himself to be guided out of the small compartment. As Louis stepped into the hallway of the carriage, he felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. His small sobs continued, but they were no longer the desperate cries of a frightened child. They were soft, quiet expressions of release. The captain and the other guards offered quiet words of comfort, guiding him toward a larger, open area in the carriage where he could sit safely. The train staff, who had been observing the search from a distance, let out quiet sighs of relief. They exchanged glances, sharing the silent acknowledgement that the situation had been handled carefully and successfully. It had been a tense few minutes, but the coordination and professionalism of the Royal Guard had ensured that the young prince was safe and unharmed. Once seated in the open area, Louis clutched his toy close to his chest. The captain knelt slightly, speaking gently. "Louis, you were very brave. I know it felt scary, but you did the right thing by letting us find you. You're safe now, and everyone is here to take care of you." The words, simple as they were, brought a wave of comfort to the boy. His small shoulders relaxed slightly, and his tears began to subside. Though the adventure had been frightening, the experience also taught him something important, that asking for help and trusting others could be a source of strength, not weakness. As the train began to move slowly along the tracks, the sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating Louis's small figure. He looked out at the passing scenery, the trees, the fields, and the distant hills, and realized that the world was much larger than he had imagined. It was exciting, yes, but it could also be overwhelming. He now understood the value of guidance and protection, even in moments when he longed for independence. Captain Thomas remained nearby, observing the boy and ensuring that he was calm. He had dealt with many high-pressure situations, but the gentle care required in this moment was unique. Louis was a young child, full of curiosity and courage, yet vulnerable. The balance of patience, reassurance, and authority was delicate, but it had worked. The prince had been found without harm, and the experience, though stressful, would leave a lasting impression on him. In the palace, Lady Margaret and the other caretakers were relieved when news reached them that Louis had been located. A wave of quiet celebration swept through the staff, though the focus remained on ensuring that the boy was safe and comfortable. Plans were made to meet the train at the next station and escort Louis back to the palace, where he would be surrounded by family, familiar comforts, and a sense of security. As the journey continued, Louis sat quietly, slowly recovering from the emotional whirlwind of the morning. He hugged his toy, feeling its softness against him, and reflected on the events that had unfolded. The adventure he had sought had come with unexpected lessons. The importance of safety, the value of patience, and the reassurance that those who care for him would always be there to guide him, even when he felt alone. The Royal Guard, ever vigilant, maintained a careful watch over him, ensuring that the young prince remained calm and unharmed. Their presence was a reminder that courage could be accompanied by protection, and that bravery did not mean facing challenges entirely alone. Louis, despite the tears and fear, began to understand that asking for help and trusting those around him was also a form of strength. By the time the train neared the next station, Louis had grown calmer. The sobs had nearly stopped, replaced by quiet contemplation. He looked around at the polished carriages, the gentle sway of the train, and the attentive guards who had guided him out of his hiding spot. Though he had sought adventure, he now appreciated the care and protection provided by the royal guard and the palace staff. The experience, intense as it had been, would stay with him for years to come. It was a story of curiosity, courage, and the lessons learned when independence met the reality of the world. Louis had ventured into the unknown and had been met with both fear and reassurance, ultimately learning the delicate balance between exploration and safety. As the train continued to glide along the tracks, Prince Louis remained seated, still clutching his small stuffed toy, his eyes occasionally darting to the faces of the guards surrounding him. Though he was no longer hiding, a quiet unease lingered within him. The adventure he had embarked upon had been thrilling in his imagination, but the reality of being alone in an unfamiliar environment had taught him how frightening the world could sometimes feel. Yet despite his lingering fear, there was a growing sense of relief, a comfort in knowing that the people around him were there to help, not to scold. Captain Thomas sat nearby, observing the boy with a mixture of professional vigilance and genuine care. He had led countless missions and handled emergencies of every kind, but there was something uniquely tender about guiding a young child through such a situation. He understood that Louis's emotions were complex, excitement mixed with fear, curiosity tinged with regret. His approach had to balance reassurance with authority, patience with gentle encouragement. "Louis," Captain Thomas said softly, kneeling down so that he was at eye level with the boy, "I know this has been a frightening experience, but you've been very brave. You stayed safe, and now we can make sure everything is all right." Louis looked up at him, his tear-streaked face still small and vulnerable. The captain's voice had a calm steadiness, a rhythm that seemed to echo the gentle sway of the train itself. Louis clutched his toy tighter, but he felt a tiny spark of courage. He realized that the fear he had felt while hiding was beginning to loosen its grip. For the first time in what felt like hours, he allowed himself to breathe a little more freely. The other guards gave space, forming a protective but non-threatening circle around the young prince. Their eyes remained alert, scanning the train for any potential danger, but their movements were calm, measured, and non-intrusive. Louis noticed the care with which they treated him, and the trust that had been difficult to summon earlier slowly began to grow. Meanwhile, the palace staff had been informed that the prince was found and was safe. Lady Margaret, who had been coordinating efforts from the palace, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Though she had known that the royal guard was skilled and experienced, nothing could fully erase the anxiety of not knowing the boy's whereabouts. She quickly relayed the news to the king and queen, whose faces, though composed, revealed the faintest traces of worry and concern. The news was a welcome reprieve, and preparations were immediately made for the train to meet with palace representatives at the nearest station. Inside the carriage, Louis began to speak in soft, halting sentences, describing how he had wandered into the train and how he had hidden. His voice was small, almost hesitant, but each word was an acknowledgement of the bravery it took to face the consequences of his choices. Captain Thomas listened attentively, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, giving the boy the space to express himself. It was important for Louis to feel heard and understood, and the captain's patience allowed him to do so. I just wanted to see outside," Louis whispered, "and I didn't want anyone to stop me. I thought it would be fun, but it was scary." He pressed his face into his toy again, his voice quivering slightly. Captain Thomas reached out a hand, resting it gently on Louis's shoulder. "I understand, Louis. It's okay to be curious, and it's okay to feel scared. Everyone feels that way sometimes. The important thing is that you're safe now, and we're here to help you. You didn't get into any real danger, and that shows a lot of courage." Louis listened quietly, absorbing the reassurance. He realized that bravery wasn't just about exploring or taking risks. It was also about trusting others and acknowledging when help was needed. For a moment, he felt a small sense of pride, mingled with relief. His small adventure had been frightening, yes, but it had also taught him something invaluable about himself and the people who cared for him. As the train neared the next station, the familiar faces of palace staff began to appear on the platform. Lady Margaret and several guards were waiting, ready to escort Louis safely back to the palace. Seeing them brought an immediate rush of comfort to the young prince. He waved timidly from the train, his small hand clutching the toy, and the staff responded with gentle smiles and reassuring gestures. The sight of people he trusted and loved made him feel safe in a way he had not felt while hiding. The train slowed to a stop and the doors opened. Captain Thomas and the other guards guided Louis carefully down the steps, ensuring that he felt secure with each movement. Lady Margaret stepped forward and knelt down to embrace him, her voice soft and warm. "Louis, you're safe now. We were so worried about you, but we're glad you're okay." Louis wrapped his small arms around her, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. The physical comfort of a familiar presence, coupled with the emotional reassurance of being found, made him realize just how vulnerable and small he had felt earlier. But now, surrounded by care, he felt the tension inside him begin to fade. Once safely back on solid ground, the palace staff and guards escorted Louis to a more private area, away from the bustle of the train platform. Here, he could rest, recover, and process the whirlwind of emotions he had experienced over the past few hours. Soft blankets were provided, a warm drink was offered, and his favorite snacks were set before him. Each gesture, simple as it was, reinforced the sense of safety and care that surrounded him. As he sat quietly, sipping the warm drink, Louis began to reflect on the morning's events. He thought about the curiosity that had driven him to sneak onto the train, the excitement of embarking on what he had imagined to be a grand adventure, and the fear that had followed once he realized he was truly alone. He realized that the thrill of exploration came with responsibilities and consequences. The lesson was clear. Seeking adventure was natural and exciting, but it was important to do so safely and with the awareness of those who cared for him. The guards, standing nearby, continued their watch, but their demeanor had softened. They spoke quietly among themselves, exchanging brief comments on how the situation had been resolved. Though their primary focus remained on the safety of the prince, there was also a sense of shared relief and quiet satisfaction in seeing him calm and unharmed. Captain Thomas stayed close, monitoring Louis while offering gentle words of encouragement and reassurance. As the day progressed, the king and queen arrived at the station, having been informed of the prince's safety. Their faces, though composed, revealed traces of concern that had not fully disappeared. Seeing Louis safe and in good spirits brought an immediate sense of relief. They knelt down beside him, their presence offering warmth, love, and security. "Louis, we're so glad you're safe," the queen said softly, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. Louis looked up at his parents, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and a quiet understanding of the care and concern they held for him. He realized that while he had sought freedom and adventure, there was an undeniable comfort in being surrounded by people who loved him and were responsible for his safety. For a moment, he allowed himself to fully relax, enjoying the embrace and reassurance of his family. The train, now empty and ready to continue its journey, symbolized both the adventure he had imagined and the lesson he had learned. Curiosity and courage were important, yes, but so were trust, patience, and awareness of the boundaries that ensured safety. Louis understood that true bravery was not only in taking risks, but also in recognizing when guidance and protection were needed. Throughout the day, as the young prince settled back into familiar surroundings, the palace staff reflected on the morning's events. They had witnessed firsthand the mixture of curiosity, courage, and vulnerability that made Louis unique. The incident became a gentle reminder that even young royals, though surrounded by luxury and protection, experience emotions and challenges similar to any child. It was a moment that highlighted the importance of empathy, patience, and understanding in guiding children through both excitement and fear. By the evening, Louis had returned to the comfort of the palace, surrounded by the warmth of family and the familiar routines that had been temporarily disrupted. Though exhausted, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and understanding. He had experienced a moment of adventure, faced his fears, and learned valuable lessons about trust, safety, and the importance of being found when lost. The day ended quietly with Louis resting in his room, his stuffed toy by his side, reflecting on the lessons learned. Though he would continue to be curious and seek adventures in his own way, the experience had left a lasting impression. It was a story of courage, trust, and the balance between freedom and care, an experience that would shape his understanding of the world for years to come. The events of that morning had left an impression not only on Prince Louis, but also on everyone in the palace. By the time evening fell, the young prince had returned to his room, the soft glow of lamps illuminating the familiar corners of his space. The comfort of home, combined with the quiet reassurance of his family, made the room feel like a sanctuary after the day's whirlwind. Louis sat quietly on the edge of his bed, hugging his small stuffed toy as he thought about the adventure he had undertaken and the lessons it had taught him. Though his heart was no longer racing with fear, the memories of sneaking onto the train and hiding in the small compartment lingered vividly in his mind. He remembered the initial thrill of freedom, the excitement of stepping into the unknown, and the sense of being in control. But he also remembered the cold wash of fear that had come when he realized he was truly alone, the uncertainty of whether anyone would find him, and the quiet sobs he had shed in the tiny compartment. These moments, once frightening, now seemed like important parts of a story he would carry with him for the rest of his life. As Louis reflected, Lady Margaret entered the room quietly, carrying a small tray with a warm drink and a few snacks. Her face held a gentle smile, a mixture of relief and quiet pride. "Louis," she said softly, "you were very brave today. I know it was scary, but you did the right thing by trusting us when we came to find you." Louis nodded slowly, still hugging his toy tightly. "It was scary, but they were kind," he said in a small voice, referring to Captain Thomas and the other guards. "They didn't shout, they didn't get angry, they just helped me." Lady Margaret smiled and sat beside him, her presence calm and reassuring. "That's right, Louis. Sometimes bravery isn't about doing something daring alone. It's about trusting the people who care for you and asking for help when you need it. Today, you were very brave because you allowed yourself to be helped. That is just as important as any adventure you might dream of." Louis thought about her words carefully. He had always associated bravery with bold actions, climbing walls, exploring secret rooms, and sneaking into forbidden places. But now he understood that courage could also be found in quieter, subtler moments, in trusting others, in facing fear, and in learning from experiences. The lesson was profound, though he was only 7. It was a lesson about balance. Curiosity and independence were wonderful, but they were best guided by awareness and care. Later that evening, the king and queen entered the room. Their presence carried a warmth that only parents can provide, a calm reassurance that made the young prince feel protected and loved. The queen knelt beside him, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. "Louis, my dear, we were worried about you," she said softly. "But seeing you safe and calm now fills our hearts with relief. You've learned something important today, and I hope you remember it always." The king, standing nearby with a thoughtful expression, added, "Adventure is part of life, Louis, and your curiosity is a gift. But it must always be paired with wisdom and understanding. You've seen firsthand how quickly things can feel overwhelming and how important it is to rely on those who care for you. That balance is what makes a person truly strong." Louis listened carefully, absorbing every word. The advice of his parents, combined with the experience of the morning, gave him a deeper understanding of his own emotions and actions. He realized that while adventure and exploration were exciting, they carried responsibilities and consequences. It wasn't enough to simply act on impulse. Consideration, awareness, and trust were essential parts of any experience. Throughout the rest of the evening, Louis reflected on the events of the day in quiet solitude. He thought about Captain Thomas and the guards, about the careful way they had approached him, the patience they had shown, and the reassurance they had provided. Their actions had taught him that authority and care could coexist, that guidance did not have to come with fear, and that those who were responsible for him could be trusted completely. In the days that followed, subtle changes began to appear in the palace routine. While the strict schedules and rules remained in place, there was a newfound understanding among the caretakers and staff of the emotional needs of the young prince. Moments of quiet freedom were allowed, supervised adventures that provided exploration and learning in safe environments. The staff observed more attentively, listening to Louis's thoughts and feelings, encouraging him to express himself without fear of judgment. The incident on the train had reminded everyone that even young royals, surrounded by luxury and protection, had emotional and psychological needs that required attention and understanding. Louis himself grew more aware of his own feelings and limits. He still loved to explore and dream of adventures, but he began to approach them with greater care. When curiosity beckoned, he considered the safety of his surroundings and the importance of guidance from those he trusted. The lessons of that morning were never far from his mind. The mixture of excitement and fear, the value of trust, and the quiet bravery found in being honest about one's feelings. He also developed a deeper empathy for others. Seeing how much effort the royal guard, the palace staff, and his parents had invested in ensuring his safety, gave him an appreciation for the care and responsibility others carried on his behalf. He began to understand that his actions affected not only himself, but also the people around him who cared deeply for his well-being. The experience taught him a sense of gratitude and responsibility that went beyond the immediate adventure. One afternoon, a week after the incident, Louis revisited the train under careful supervision. This time, it was not an act of rebellion or secret exploration, but a guided tour provided by the Royal Guard. Captain Thomas led him through the polished carriages, explaining how the train worked, showing him the controls, and allowing him to sit in the small compartments safely. Louis's eyes sparkled with curiosity, but this time, the experience was accompanied by understanding and reassurance. He could explore, ask questions, and satisfy his curiosity, all within safe boundaries. Louis reflected on the difference between this experience and his earlier morning adventure. He realized that curiosity and exploration were wonderful, but when paired with guidance and awareness, they could be fulfilling and safe. The thrill of adventure did not need to come from fear or secrecy. It could come from learning, observing, and experiencing new things in a supportive environment. This understanding made him feel more confident, more capable of balancing his natural curiosity with the wisdom he had begun to develop. The palace staff, too, continued to adjust their approach, balancing supervision with moments of independence. They encouraged Louis to express his feelings, to ask questions, and to engage in activities that stimulated his imagination while keeping him safe. The incident on the train had left a lasting mark, but it also created an opportunity for growth, for the young prince, for the staff, and for the family as a whole. In quiet moments, Louis often thought back to that morning, recalling the small compartment, the sound of the guards, gentle voices, and the overwhelming mix of fear and relief. He remembered the lessons learned, that bravery could be quiet, that trust was a form of courage, and that even small actions could carry great meaning. These memories, though initially stressful, became a foundation upon which he could build a more mature understanding of the world around him. By the end of the month, Louis had grown noticeably more thoughtful. He still loved adventure and curiosity, but he approached both with care and awareness. He shared his experiences with close friends and staff in small, reflective conversations, describing the emotions he had felt and the lessons he had learned. These discussions reinforced his understanding, helping him internalize the balance between freedom and safety, excitement and caution, independence and trust. The Royal Guard, proud of their role in the morning's events, continued to maintain a watchful but unobtrusive presence around the palace. Their actions had not only ensured the prince's immediate safety, but had also provided him with a model of patience, care, and guidance. The young prince had learned from their example, understanding that authority could be compassionate, and that help could be a form of strength rather than weakness. As months passed, the story of the morning on the royal train became a quiet legend within the palace. It was not told as a tale of danger or fear, but as a story of learning, growth, and understanding. It became a reminder to everyone that even in lives filled with privilege and protection, lessons about courage, trust, and emotional awareness were valuable and essential. Louis, now a little older and wiser, carried these lessons into his daily life. His curiosity remained undiminished, his sense of adventure intact, but he had gained the wisdom to temper it with caution and awareness. He approached new experiences with excitement, yet with a sense of responsibility and mindfulness that had been born from that morning's adventure. In the quiet moments of reflection, he realized that the greatest adventure of all had not been sneaking onto the train, but learning about courage, trust, and the quiet strength of allowing oneself to be cared for. That morning, filled with fear and excitement, had become a turning point in his young life, a lesson in balancing independence with guidance, curiosity with safety, and adventure with wisdom.